So do you think the fact that China now has the largest navy in the world, that there's the war in Ukraine, is that going to be like the shot of adrenaline that the country needs to get back on track?
Well, the Congress is saying that the defense budget is going to increase. We'll see how it increases and what happens with the money that the Congress provides.
Yeah, because throwing money at a problem is not necessarily the same as
Right.
a fundamental shift in saying, okay, our Navy is, how did you put it, the single greatest determinant of geopolitics. That's a philosophical change that needs to happen.
Yeah, I agree. You know, I'm a navalist. You can take a man out of the Navy, but you can't take the Navy out of the man. And if I could fit into my uniform, I'd go down to the waterfront and look for a ship or a squadron. But I wouldn't give the Navy another dollar until they told me what they were going to do with it. I wouldn't do it.
That seems so obvious. Like, before we give you money, you should have a plan for how to use that money. Like, that's just...
Now, a naval officer, a serving officer would be hitting me over the head right now, and he would say, "Oh, but we tell everybody all the time." I don't think so. I don't think they tell the country publicly. The Congress is the few congressmen who care will routinely point out that the Navy's not telling them what it needs. Now, this is not rocket science. The great congressional architect of the so-called two-ocean Navy of World War II, was a congressman from a landlocked district in Georgia. We have an aircraft carrier named after him. His name was Carl Vinson. He was, by the way, Sam Nunn's uncle. So he was referred to as Uncle Carl. He went to Congress in 1914. He was elected in 1914. Got to Washington in early 1915. And I guess he looked around and he said, well, I guess I got to be good at something. And he chose the Navy. And thank heavens he did, because he would, for instance, with the Navy, in close collaboration, it was almost a conspiracy, he would organize the Navy's testimonies in the key committees in the Congress. That would play out. And then he would double what the Navy asked for. It was amazing. It's quite a story. You can read his autobiography and you'll be amazed. But he started this effort because he had the foresight. He started in the early 1930s. Hitler was in power, but Nazi Germany hadn't become what it was going to be later. And he said, in the context of the naval arms control treaties of the time, he said, well, we should at least have as many ships as were allowed by treaty. And, those ships should be modern. They should be new ships. And so that whole enterprise of thinking about the fleet, even albeit constrained by treaty limits and so on at the time, started early. And this is a key point, especially for the Navy, but not just for the Navy, because it's also this geopolitics as well. Whatever is going to happen started way back years ago. So what's happening in China started many, many years ago. There's no consensus yet on when the Chinese government started preparing for war with the United States. Some people say, well, 2010. Other people, Jim Fennell, who's been on your show, for instance, says, no, 1949. I would say that and I'm not a China scholar, so I can be wrong about this. I would say, though, that it was no later than about the time of the first Gulf War, when China remember, China had now chosen to be on our side. We had a burgeoning political and economic and defense relationship, lest we forget, with Beijing. But they saw what we did to Iraq, and they got very concerned about that. And they realized, and then of course Tiananmen Square came. They had to make a decision whether they were going to suppress democracy or join the the West. So they joined the WTO, but they didn't join anything else. Don't get me wrong. I don't mean that literally. They're all through the international community and controlling those institutions because they've been smart about this. It's not just military power. But I would say that it's no later than 1989, 90, 91. So whether or not we have the time, given the Russian invasion of Ukraine, to get ready in that long way that we have in the past, Franklin Roosevelt spent the 1930s maneuvering the country toward rearmament and preparation. There was no mistake about what he had in mind when he gave his fireside chat on December 29th, 1940. It was the famous Arsenal of Democracy speech. And he told the country to get ready. That has not happened here. Despite whatever the Navy says about the Indo-Pacific, despite the national security strategy, the national defense strategies put out by President Trump about a year after his inauguration and so on, it really hasn't happened. And other countries, including Russia and China, understand that. They understand that that process has not started. So far, it's been sort of, okay, let's just keep doing what we've been doing, which is, number one, not correct, and number two, not sufficient.
I mean, Paul, I just wanted to ask about something you were saying earlier about the, smaller carriers being better. And I'm wondering if we're just a little reliant now on the idea that we have the best technology, we have the newest, biggest things like, asymmetric warfare, things like that, where like we can outgun or out technology Russia and China. So
we have rail guns. It doesn't matter if China has more ships.
We have those elevators on the aircraft carriers that can lift the
I mean, just thinking about your point about we're not doing the preparation. Is it because we think we're already overmatching them?
No, I don't think you're ludicrous, but anybody who thinks that, who maintains that, is fatuous and feckless and slack-jawed. So I mentioned earlier that some things stay the same and some things change. So military strategists think in terms of the nature of war, and those are the things that just don't change. Human nature, surprise, the fog of war, uncertainty, the way pride and envy overcome common sense. Those things are part of the nature of war. Those things don't change. But many things do change. And you're referring, Shelley, to the kinds of things that not only do change, but have changed and are continuing to change, that, among other things, challenge the aircraft carrier as a centerpiece of any naval force, because there are great vulnerabilities involved. And if you can't defend the carrier, then the carrier is at great risk. And because it's so expensive, then you have a real problem. But I would say that the Navy, this sounds like a real condemnation, and I suppose it is, and I am on the record. I think the Navy's whistling past the graveyard. So the Navy has bet the farm, literally, on its ability to command and control without interruption. That means that all of the networks that the Navy has set up are going to operate without being decremented or interfered with, that they're going to be able to talk to one another, that they're going to be able to share targeting information. This all goes out over frequencies and is shared in networks that are very, very fragile. So there are, literally up until yesterday, I was thinking that the two big things that have changed are cyber warfare and space warfare. what I just described, this reliance on networks, depends completely on the uninterrupted use of space. And until recently, and reality hasn't caught up with reality hasn't caught up with treaties, space was supposed to be demilitarized. Well, you don't have to be a rocket scientist, again, pun intended, to understand that the next war is going to be fought to, from, through, and in space. So all those communication satellites up there, good luck with that. And then, so that's the sort of the structure of these networks. The sanctity of the networks, however, is subject to cyber warfare, where either the networks are brought down or they're interfered with. And you either know that they're being interfered with, or you don't know they're being interfered with. And it calls into question every message, every communication that does get through. So until just the other day, I was thinking these are the two new things that define changes, in addition to hypersonic weapons and so on, that define the most apparent changes to the so-called character of war, all these technologies and so on. But then I realized, and because I'm literally organizing a series of articles that are talking about how the Navy has to get ready, I realized that nuclear is back on the table because our friend Vladimir has told us it is. And, he gets a vote. What he says really counts. Now, the Navy denuclearized, with the exception of the submarine-launched ballistic missiles, in about 1991. And the next sound you heard was the door slamming on the Navy tactical nuclear weapons enterprise. Now, I know of what I speak because not only was I a nuclear weapons delivery pilot, but I actually dropped one. And it was a test. It was a non-explosive test to test the fusing of the weapon, which is very complicated because you really want it to go off when you want it to go off, and you really don't want it to go off when you don't want it to go off. So we loaded our P3 up and it carried as a tactical exercise. We played it strictly by the rules, a two-man rule and everything else. I was under arms. There's many sea stories to go with that. We don't have time for that. But and we flew out to Hawaii and dropped the weapon on an instrumented range in Hawaii so that they could track and collect all their data and so on. But all of that stopped at the end of the Cold War. And only recently has this issue of nuclear weapons come up again. And guess who's brought it up? Not the Navy. It's not a bright idea. Well, of course, I don't know what the Navy's saying internally, but the Navy has not said anything about this. Shinzo Abe has brought it up. And so have the South Korean commenters about, well, the Koreans have said, well, I don't think we want American tactical nuclear weapons back on the Korean Peninsula, because when the Navy ended its forward deployment of nuclear weapons, so did we on the Korean Peninsula. But you could put them in Guam, couldn't you? Or you could have them on your ships, couldn't you? And Shinzo Abe is making the same, now out of government, of course, is now making the same kind of suggestions. This, if nothing else has gotten our attention, this is an earth-shattering, epical event that a Japanese politician is publicly calling for American nuclear weapons. And they say, well, you share control of nuclear weapons with numbers of European countries. Why don't you do the same with us? Well, I'm not sure that horse is ever going to get out of the stable in terms of reality in Tokyo. We'll see. But the fact that they're saying this is an indication of how much things have changed. And in the meantime, you'd never know it listening to admirals talk. You'd never know it. And I know things are changing. And I think that the impetus of the Russian invasion of Ukraine is going to push things along. We'll see. But if you think about the fact that virtually no serving military officer was commissioned yet when the Cold War was still going, because the mandatory retirement is 30 years of service. Now, there are some exceptions to that, and some of the very senior admirals served for longer than 30 years. But my point is, there's no body of experience to fall back on. So we've got a lot of work to do. So, we play a game. What year are we actually in? And some people say 1940, some people say 1939, 38. I would say about 1920. I don't mean that we're going to have 20 years to get ready, but the fact that the Germans in 1919 turned immediately to getting ready for World War II. They literally, this is a great irony of history, they literally conducted secret field exercises in the Western Soviet Union, if you can believe it.
Ironic.
So one of the great ironies.
Yeah.
But it takes a long time to get ready. And if you accept my argument that we are not ready and that we haven't been getting ready, then you can kind of date and project out how long it's going to take and so on.
But what if we're in 1920, but the world situation is in 1938?
Right. And it's not, yeah, exactly. Right. In other words, we're in 1920, but the world is in 1938. I couldn't have said it better myself.